Hi, everyone. I'm Prasad Raman, VP of Partnerships here at Cycode, and I'm delighted to be your host for this session on why we should bridge the gap between ASPM and vulnerability management. Today, securing applications requires a unified and comprehensive approach, connecting the deep insights of application security posture management with the broader context of risk-based vulnerability. To help us understand how to build a more comprehensive approach to solve some of AppSec's biggest pains, I'm delighted to welcome a leading voice in the vulnerability management space. We have Adam Dudley, VP of Strategy and Alliances at Nucleus, here with us today.
How's it going, Prasad? Happy to be here.
Great to see you.
Yeah, you as well.
Well, awesome. So let's just dive straight into this question. Today both of our organizations tackle this problem. Applications are becoming increasingly complex. So what are some of the core challenges you see organizations facing in achieving comprehensive visibility? So both deep within their application environment and then how they put that in context across the entire enterprise.
It's a great question, and actually it reminds me of why Nucleus was started in the very early days. And Nucleus was really started to help with fragmented data all over the enterprise that's used in vulnerability management processes. And fragmented data and too much data really creates this overwhelm that a lot of our shared customers are experiencing, where there's too much noise, there's too much data, it's fragmented across different tools and different parts, parts of the vulnerability management program or parts of the application security program. Today, or when our Nucleus founders started, really people were more concerned about just network and device infrastructure and things of that nature. But now, very much a concern is code repos, CI/CD pipelines, container registries, runtime environments, all those types of things. And so it creates a whole new unique set of challenges. Like the challenge itself isn't new, but it's sort of the nuance of the challenge and all the different, technologies that we're dealing with today.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think one of the awesome things about Nucleus and the reason we love partnering with you guys is, it's the unified visibility across your entire application environment. What are some of the consequences you see when enterprises don't have this visibility all the way from, the code level to where that is deployed? What are some of the challenges or risks that enterprises face when they have some of these blind spots?
Sure. So it's really when security teams and developers concerned with security are operating in silos, right? So, we have prospective customers come to us, and this is their whole issue. And it's like, I have different teams in different silos doing different things that affect security, and I don't have unified visibility into what's going on, usually at the leadership or executive level. And that's critical because a CISO or head of product security or head of application security, they're getting asked questions by their board, by the CTO or the CIO. They need to be able to answer questions about the holistic risk across the whole environment, not just application security, not just cloud security, not just VM or network or device security, but across the whole enterprise. And that's one of the reasons they seek us out, is to really unify the information in one place so that they can start to cultivate and get the answers they need to answer those questions they're being asked.
Yeah, and this problem has gotten worse in the past few years. I think you look post-COVID, we have a shift to work from home. You have increasing use of bring your own devices. You're seeing a change in how applications are developed. There's more cloud native architectures today. You don't control the infrastructure your apps are running on. What are some of the, how has that problem gotten worse? And how does Nucleus see that continuing to get worse?
Sure. Well, I think you called out the reasons. It's increasing infrastructure, increasing code sprawled all across the organization. It's very difficult, I think, for the security organization in a large enterprise to keep track of who's doing what and who's spinning up what, especially, talking about things like ephemeral workloads in cloud native environments. And, the code sitting on those workloads. Uh, like I said, rapid deployments, things being spun up and down all the time without necessarily security having a really close eye on it. And so, really what this does is it renders sort of traditional vulnerability management approaches that were conceived of back in the day when all you had to care about was servers and devices. That renders those approaches really irrelevant and inconsequential now. So need totally new approaches, new modern approaches that includes coverage for DevOps and GitOps pipelines with multiple security checkpoints. Of course, things that Cycode is a real expert in and handles very well: code, infrastructures code, and secrets management. Any of those areas requiring continuous integrated approaches, you have to have a platform like Cycode to address that for you, and then combining it, with a Nucleus type layer on the holistic level, really gives you that coverage and that visibility that most of our prospective customers are looking for.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, another piece about, why we love partnering with Nucleus is, oftentimes in organizations, there are different personas. So you have, a really deep application security team working with the engineering organization, the DevOps organization. And then you've got, the enterprise-wide security team. They definitely work in collaboration with the AppSec team, but they're also looking at context across the organization. In your experience, have you seen those teams work in collaboration effectively? And what are some of the challenges you see in, establishing effective communication between the AppSec team and the enterprise-wide security team?
That's a great topic. And I think that what we're usually seeing is that the organization that has this ironed out, has the communication flow ironed out, that's a kind of a rare case still today. And more typically, an organization comes to us, they're definitely experiencing some kind of disconnect, between like the development organization or the engineering organization and security operation. There's usually a lot of friction there. Sometimes, the worst of the worst case is, security is working in a scanning platform, generating some kind of massive report and just sending it out to developers and saying, hey, here's all that stuff. Here's all the stuff that's broken. You need to fix it. And without any context or without any prioritization or anything like that, that's the worst case scenario. And that still happens today. Right. And the other shared problem in this situation is that the lack of, I love this phrase, kind of got hooked on, is the lack of a universal risk language. Right. So the security team is speaking a much different language than the engineering team. The engineer or even the security team at the management level is speaking a much different language than the security team at the executive level, and these kind of communication barriers create all kinds of friction and problems in the process where we're all just trying to get to fix the stuff that really matters and that is actually exposing the most risk in the organization. So, when you put together, two platforms that are specialists in what they do, Cycode on the ASPM side and aligning code with the security organization, then Nucleus, unifying vulnerability data from all the different sources across the enterprise and giving dashboards. What you get, I think, is this shared language that is absolutely necessary to, get the teams communicating well together using the same terminology about risk. And that's going to help you get to faster remediation of the stuff that really matters.
Yeah, I'd love to dig into that a little bit more in terms of, how you measure risk and quantify risk. And I think, you're seeing increasingly, it's very easy for cyber people to talk about, CVEs and top 10 vulnerabilities and all that stuff. But I think what organizations are increasingly looking at is understanding the business impact and what business risk does this expose me to. I think Nucleus is on the forefront of this. But I'd love to hear a little bit about how, the team at Nucleus and your customers are moving beyond identifying vulnerabilities and speaking, to other cyber teams, but how do they translate that to business leaders, and how do they translate risk into, the language of the business?
That's a great question. And actually, for this part of the conversation, I pulled up a little stat or a quote, from a report. It's actually the Ponemon Institute Cost of Vuln Management report came out in 2022, which said that less than 35% of enterprises successfully integrate business risk context into vuln prioritization, leading to inefficient patching efforts. So less than 35% are getting the context they need to make quality risk decisions. I was also on a call with a CISO the other day of a large multinational with the organization so large they have 5 CISOs across different regions across the world, and they have a very sprawling operation. So they have infrastructure in different verticals, like all over the world. And the biggest problem, this guy said, was getting the context he needs to make risk decisions. And so, we're asking him, hey, what can vendors do to provide you with better solutions? He said, context. Like, I need way more context because I can't pay attention to all the vulnerabilities across all the infrastructure across my whole global organization. It's literally impossible. And so what we prize most here at this organization is context, tools that can give us that information. And so, it's going beyond just assessment and taking the vulnerabilities that come out of that assessment and layering on things like asset criticality context. If these vulnerabilities are used in an exploit and hackers gain access to the asset, whether that's code or a server or whatever, what is the criticality of that? If they get control of that, what does that mean to the business at large? Not just in this context of security, but the actual business risk, the exploitability of the vulnerabilities that are sitting on assets that, might be the crown jewels, business processes, things like that. Layering all of this context, vulnerability intelligence, specialized to the particular environment that the customer is working in, looking at specific APT groups that might be targeting their industry. So, Nucleus, takes in all this information from all these different tools sprawling across the enterprise and layers on that information so the senior leaders can have that context they need to make high quality risk decisions.
No, that's incredibly insightful. I want to move over a little bit. So it's all well and good to identify the vulnerabilities, to prioritize them, but at some point, enterprises have to address them. And I want to talk a little bit about the challenges that you're seeing enterprises to translate from, technology tools that will help identify and prioritize vulnerabilities to the process of kind of actually reducing their risk posture. What are some of the best in class organizations doing, and what are some of the challenges you see to actually translate some of the insights that our tools can deliver to actually putting those into action?
Sure. It's a great question. And I think that what comes to mind first is automation, right? Like, actually, it's Nucleus's mission as a company to help organizations prevent breaches by automating risk-based vulnerability management at scale. And so everything we do here at Nucleus, everything we build is driving towards that automation ideal. Like, vulnerability management is a very difficult process, regardless if you're doing it in application security or more traditional VM. It's a very hard process. And something I've learned, in my 5 or 6 years immersed in this space is that people actually don't last long in vulnerability management jobs because the work is so difficult. You're not going to see someone be a vulnerability analyst necessarily for a very long period of time. Usually that's kind of a starting point in their security career, and they're wanting to get to the next thing. And that's because it really is a hard job. And unless you have more sophisticated tools like Nucleus that have an automation engine and framework that can, automate a lot of routine, very manual tasks. And people underestimate, people that haven't been doing vuln management for a long time in an enterprise environment, they really underestimate how much sub process there is between the actual discovery of the vulnerabilities and the actual remediation of them. There's so many distinct use cases in there. Nucleus itself has upwards of 150 distinct use cases related to this process. And so um, the automation is where you see a mature company that is actually able to keep up with their vulnerabilities that are truly critical and truly exploitable. They are typically automating a lot of work and doing much, much more with less, so to speak.
Yeah, and I mean, we often don't consider the human side enough, and what the
That's right.
experience of our customers day to day. Um, when you look at organizations, the vuln management team or the application security team, they actually have to build those internal relationships with other teams across the enterprise. And oftentimes, I think one of the challenges we see is, you find an issue or find a vulnerability. Who should own that, and who has the who owns fixing it and who has the ability to actually fix it. So can you talk a little bit about the role of mapping and assigning ownership of vulnerabilities to the right teams? What role does that play in improving accountability, reducing delays, and getting to a better risk posture?
For sure. This is a very hot topic, one I'm particularly fascinated by because it involves the business context so much. And so, at one point I was having dinner with a customer, one of our large retail customers, and really the whole reason they bought Nucleus was for this very reason, was because they were having trouble representing ownership of assets, assigning vulnerabilities for people that either own or support those assets. And when I say asset, if you haven't figured out already, I'm referring to really anything that can be affected by a vulnerability. That's kind of our own internal label. So it could be application code or network infrastructure, devices, so on. But yeah, so I was having dinner with this customer, and this large retail customer had 21 different divisions at their organization, each with its own distinct, business unit owner that was kind of doing security in their own way. And so not only did this create a communication problem because, the CISO at the top over all these folks really couldn't get a straight answer about what's the overall risk picture from vulnerabilities. There's also a matter of ownership, like to be able to enforce security, to create a culture of accountability. He had to be able to segment all the different divisions by what assets they were responsible for keeping secure. And you're able to represent that taxonomy in Nucleus. And then once he had those assets in that taxonomy in Nucleus, he's able to, unify that communication of risk in a way that was uniform across all those different divisions. And with that clear accountability and clear ownership, then you eliminate the opportunities to pass the buck, so to speak. And so, when you have something like Cycode integrated with, your source control and pipeline metadata, which allows, automated identification of the developers that are responsible, and the teams who are responsible early in the development lifecycle to the left. And then you combine and integrate that with Nucleus, where you have this holistic database of assets and ownership, which links the vulnerabilities into that database as well. And you're wiring all that up to the right teams and the roles and the due dates or the service level agreements. This is what really helps to make remediation responsibility explicit and drive the fixing of those things that are the most risky without not anybody able to say like, hey, that's not my responsibility.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's, at the end of the day, we're all trying to get to outcomes. And I think it's a combination of visibility, the prioritization, and then, it's important not to forget the human side of that.
Yeah, it's a big part of it. What they say, cliche at this point, but people, process, and technology. The people part is a main pillar, and I think generally people like to know what they're responsible for, and sometimes you need the technology to enable that at scale.
Yeah. So we're getting close to the end of the session, and I wanted to make sure that we had a little bit of an opportunity to look at the future. And obviously, trends around AI are growing.
Sure.
But I wanted to ask you, um, what are some of the shifts you see, and what are some of the shifts you're building for at Nucleus as we're approaching this next chapter? And how are organizations going to approach unifying, their application security stack with the rest of their security environment? And how are enterprises going to approach this problem going forward? And um, how are you guys planning for that future?
Yeah, great question. And it's my favorite kind of question. I'm very, forward, future thinking. And so I'll go back to what I heard on that call with the CISO actually just last week about context being the most important thing to him and his organization. And I think you're going to see more and more of that, where the emphasis and the focus is on real time, getting the customer or the security leader that real time context they need to make decisions in the moment. They don't want to have to go digging or asking a whole ton of questions to get at that context they need to make their executive level decisions. And so I think that at Nucleus, we're going to continue on that pathway to provide more relevant context faster at the point in time that the user and the leadership needs it. So that's number one. I do think that, really pertaining to this conversation, especially the convergence or the continued convergence of application security with the broader risk framework in an enterprise is going to continue because today almost every organization relies on applications and application code to deliver their value proposition to their customers, whether those customers are internal or external. And so application security cannot be separate, from the entire risk picture. And really, I think, Nucleus and Cycode are well positioned to be at the forefront of this. We're both providing, unified intelligence. We're, connecting code to cloud and tying it to security risk across the broader enterprise and giving that context that the leadership needs to see, what the business impact is for different security decisions. So I'm really excited about the future, and I think we're going to see things continue in the direction that they currently are.
Well, it sounds like we got a lot to look forward to. And to close it out, it wouldn't be a webinar in 2025 if we didn't talk about AI. And I'd love to ask for your thoughts on how is the proliferation of AI tools going to affect both threat landscape that we're trying to protect against, and then what are some of the kind of ways that's going to become embedded in the unified vulnerability management process?
Yeah, I think it's still early days for useful applications of AI. I think that it was amazing to me to see how much progress we had made just in a year from RSA 2024 to RSA 2025, just within the past month of this recording. And so, I think a year ago when I was RSA, things were pretty, there really weren't anything that caught my attention as a useful, valuable implementation, of the LLM technology. And this year you saw vendors actually starting to provide some useful applications. And I know Cycode is within this category with its AI offerings. And Nucleus is, we have this internal ethos where we only focus on solving real problems. And so maybe we're a little bit, we've kept things building in the background before releasing them. And so we have been working on AI applications. So looking forward to that in the second half of this year to start releasing some of those. But yeah, I'm excited about the future. I think that just seeing that progress from one year to the next, I can only imagine what I'm going to see next year, considering how fast these things are moving. So I'm pretty optimistic about AI applications, but we're still, people have to remember, we're still in the early days of these technologies being applied to security context.
Awesome. Well, Adam, this has been an incredibly insightful discussion. I had a lot of fun. I think it's a critical challenge on how we're bridging the gap between application security and RBVM. Really thank you for your expertise on these challenges and how we're solving them. Really thankful to you and Nucleus for our partnership, and appreciate appreciate the time. Um,
Thank you. It was great.
and thank you to our audience for tuning into this important conversation. I'll now hand it back to Karina, who will be taking us on to the next session. Stay tuned.